Here to answer that question and more is former U.S. Congressman and the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra, a constant guest on our show because we always like to get his insight. Pete, great to have you back.
Hey, thank you. Good morning.
All right, still I want to focus back on Kerry's open mic comment, still kind of causing some concern in terms of how he's really viewed in that part of the world on this issue. Of course, he was somewhat sarcastic and critical of Israel. Let's listen to Kerry and what he had to say one more time.
Yeah, it's a hell of a pinpoint operation. It's a hell of a pinpoint operation.
Right. It's escalating really, significantly, and it just underscores the need for ceasefire.
We've got to get over there.
Yep.
Thank you, John. I think, John, we ought to go tonight. I think it's crazy to be sitting around.
Of course, that was Sunday. Today is Friday. Pete, we know that Kerry's been in Egypt. He's been in Gaza. He's been in Israel. Still no ceasefire. How do you think Kerry is trying to make good on those words, trying to reconvince these folks that we were really there to support Israel?
Well, I think you've got a couple of things going on, and that clip from Fox News on Sunday, I think, it kind of encapsulates everything that's going on in foreign policy today. And I think there's 2 points. Number one, when you're under the kind of stress that Secretary Kerry is under right now, you're going to make mistakes. Being caught on a live mic, being on set, and having these types of discussions with your staff, I mean, that's a huge mistake. You just don't do that. Kerry got caught in that mistake. And the second thing is you're hearing him say, we got to do this today, we got to do this tonight, we got to get going. In America, we've always, we're used to seeing our secretaries of states being involved in shuttle diplomacy, flying between Cairo and Jerusalem, Cairo and Tel Aviv, and those types of things, and working out working on an issue. What you've now got with Secretary Kerry, he's doing shuttle diplomacy, but he's going from the crisis in Afghanistan to the crisis in the Middle East to the crisis in Libya to the crisis in Ukraine, and then the crisis in Iraq, the crisis in Syria. There's just way too many issues out there today. It shows the disarray that we have in foreign policy, how America influence and diplomacy has been scaled back, and it shows what the result of a receding America is that you've got chaos in the world today.
You mentioned all of those conflicts that the Secretary of State has to deal with. Can you think of another time in history, Pete, when a Secretary of State had to try to keep his hands and arms around so many different conflicts?
Well, no. I mean, and again, it's an indication of U.S. decline. In the past, we would have had very strong relationships with our allies in Europe. Egypt would have been a key player in the Middle East. But all of those relationships have become frayed, so it has become the responsibility of the Secretary of State to handle each one of these crises because there's no other place to go. We don't have the partners in foreign policy that we used to have who could handle another crisis while the Secretary of State was involved in the key negotiations. There's so many things going on. You're absolutely right. I can't remember a time when we've had these many things, these many hot issues in front of us on an international scope in a long time.
Meantime, thanks or no thanks to Kerry, perhaps, there is expected to be some sort of advancement today on the situation in Gaza. We're hearing reports, again, of significant collateral damage in terms of the Palestinian people as well in that situation. But if there is an advancement, some sort of ceasefire in place here, is it really just Kerry playing a ceremonial role here in the discussion?
Yeah, I think the Secretary of State he's offering a constructive role. He and the United States should get some credit for getting to a final deal. But, what's a final deal? How long is it going to last? I think it was 2 weeks ago that he made the emergency trip to Afghanistan to try to salvage the results of the election. Yesterday that deal started falling apart. And we're really trying to patch the world back together in some kind of stability, but we're doing it on a day-to-day basis without any long-term strategy for getting stability back on a global basis. And that's the problem. I think we'll get a ceasefire. I don't know if it'll happen today, but it'll happen in the next 48 hours. But where are we going to be in 10 days and where are we going to be in 2 weeks? We might be back to exactly the same spot.
Now, as we look at Kerry's job performance here on this issue, is it any way a reflection on his predecessor?
You know, this will be a debate. It'll probably become a big debate in a presidential campaign. I think it is a reflection of his predecessor. You know, she was talking yesterday and saying the Russian reset worked, and she took credit for that. And you're kind of looking at what's going on in Ukraine and saying, doesn't look like that worked to me. You know, the whole strategy in the Middle East with supporting the overthrow of Mubarak, supporting the overthrow of Gaddafi, and all we've seen is instability in the Middle East, which has emboldened folks like Hamas, Hezbollah, helped contribute to the formation of ISIS or ISIL, whatever we want to call it today. Secretary Kerry, in many ways, is trying to put the pieces back together of the things that Secretary of Clinton broke.
Well, and Pete, I also want to kind of go back to something we discussed as we were getting ready for this segment here. You wanted to go a little bit deeper into the situation, what's happening between the United States and Europe and Russia as well. We mentioned that deal pending between the French and the Russians for those helicopter carriers, those naval assets. But you also know of some deals between the U.S. and Russia. Hasn't gotten a lot of press, but something you think deserves some front page coverage. Talk to us about it. Looks like we just lost Pete. What Pete was talking about, we'll try to reestablish a connection with him, is the fact that not only do the French have a deal in place with Russia to provide them with some naval asset, these French-built ships that carry helicopters, and I believe we have Pete back, but also there's a deal in place, as Pete was telling us before, that the United States has some deals in place with Russia to buy rocket jets so that we can send our rockets into space. Pete, talk to us about the need to really shine some more light on this aspect of the story.
Yeah, I was listening into your interview with General Hayden. Great interview. He's a good friend. We were on opposite sides. He was part of the administration. I was heading up the Intelligence Committee, but we're great friends, and it was a great interview. But, you were talking about, the French and the Europeans, and the president said yesterday, get some backbone or this may stiffen their backbone. Well, it's time for the United States to stiffen their backbone. We've talked in the past about buying Russian helicopters to give to the Afghan military when we've got American helicopters that could be going there. I don't know whether we've canceled that order or not. But the other thing is, the United States yesterday, the Pentagon said, hey, we're buying Russian rocket engines to ship, to blast the rockets into space that resupply and carry our astronauts to the space station. And guess what? We're going to keep buying those rockets. Well, if the United States had some spine, we'd say we're canceling those orders, no more rockets, and we're going to give that business to American companies. But the U.S. doesn't have as much spine either. So before we start criticizing our friends and allies in Europe, it's time for us to put our own house in order.
And what do you mean? The president just yesterday was talking about the outsourcing that happens, and those folks who outsource these types of deals are essentially un-American.
Well, I guess he better look at what his Pentagon is doing. Not only are we outsourcing the purchase of rocket engines, we're outsourcing them to the Russians, and we refuse to stop that, even though there's an emerging U.S. industry again that could probably provide exactly the same capabilities that we are buying from the Russians. Yeah, the president ought to follow his own motto, buy American. It's patriotic.
Yesterday, I don't know if folks tuned into that speech, also the president went from talking about America being the largest producer of oil and natural gas now to at the same time talking about the need to expand green energy as well. It was an interesting speech. We'll continue to cover it here on the day. But Pete, I want to ask you a question, one more topic with about a minute to go here. Some folks are saying that as we look at the tragedy with the Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, that this should be giving Americans pause about supplying rebels with arms. Wanted to get your take on that with about a minute left.
Well, I think that's a very, very good point. If you're going to supply rebels or unsophisticated militias with arms, be very careful what you give them. We see now what happens when you give very sophisticated arms to a group of rebels who don't have a command and control structure in place to determine exactly when and how those weapons can and should be used. It should provide pause for the United States as we provide and arm people around the world as well. Absolutely. It's a great point.
All right, Chairman Hoekstra, thanks so much for being with us. Always great to get your take. We'll have you back, of course, very soon. All right, there you heard it from General Hayden. We also heard from General Martin Dempsey talking about the potential of a prairie fire starting there in Ukraine. Putin may be panicking right now. We'll continue to keep our eye on the latest over there in that part of the world. Also, when we come back, they're called lone soldiers. We'll introduce you to an American teen who recently joined Israeli Defense Forces. That's coming up, plus more news right after this short commercial break. Stay with us.